Released in March of 2021, Battle Styles is the 5th mainline Sword and Shield era set in the Pokemon trading card game. From a collector's perspective, it's not really that sought after. You can still get packs and booster boxes for this for pretty cheap because there just aren't that many high profile cards in here that collectors would want, even though this was the introduction of the modern wave of alternate art cards, which we'll get to in just a sec. However, from a gameplay perspective, this is one of the strongest sets to ever come out of the Sword and Shield era. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about battle styles. Now, the big gimmick of this set is that it introduced the concept of battle styles where cards had a modifier. There's a label on the top right corner here, like the Rapid Strike Urshifu here, and there was some synergy between the cards, though you didn't have to play a Rapid Strike deck in order to use these cards, kind of like Team Plasma in the past. And we're going to start with Rapid Strike Urshifu here, which was one of the most successful cards in the entirety of the Sword and Shield era, where it has 330 HP, 2 retreat, and 2 incredibly powerful moves. Gale Thrust for 1 fighting energy does 30 damage, and if you move it from the bench to the active on this turn, does 120 more damage. Hitting for 150 off of 1 energy is incredibly efficient. And then VMAX Rapid Flow for 2 fighting, 1 colorless. You discard all the energy and you do 120 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, 120 doesn't seem like a lot, but being able to spread it across the board could let you get 2 quick KOs on smaller targets, and it could help you build up damage on 2 bigger Pokemon. For example, if you're playing against another VMAX deck, you just have to use VMAX Rapid Flow 3 times to knock out 2 VMAXs and just win the game. Now, this Pokemon kind of fluctuates in and out of competitive play. Manaphy has been a big problem with it in the past. The rise of Mew VMAX has been a problem with it in the past. And in skilled hands, Rapid Strike Urshifu is still a force to be reckoned with. However, because there are so many obstacles in the way now, it's kind of difficult to play, but if you are an expert pilot, you can go really far even now with Rapid Strike Urshifu. Supporting Rapid Strike Urshifu and pretty much every Rapid Strike deck is Octillery. Now, you're not going to use it to attack, but its Rapid Strike search ability is phenomenal, allowing you to grab any card labeled Rapid Strike from the deck, put it into your hand, and this increases your consistency dramatically as it allows you to grab Pokemon, items, supporters, whatever you need, and it is pretty much the backbone of the Rapid Strike deck. Also in the Rapid Strike arsenal is Rapid Strike Energy, which counts as water energy or fighting energy, and it counts as 2 energy instead of just 1. This is before Double Turbo became a thing, and Rapid Strike decks make great use of Rapid Strike Energy. This allows Rapid Strike Urshifu to do its VMAX Rapid Flow with only 2 attachments instead of 3, which makes it way more dangerous. Covering Single Strike is Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, 330 HP, and Rapid Strike Urshifu was all about movement and kind of hitting different targets. Single Strike was very much about 1 big attack, and Single Strike Urshifu VMAX was the epitome of that, where its VMAX 1 blow does 270 damage, it shreds through any sort of effects on your opponent's Pokemon. You can punch right through Miltank, you could punch right through Zamazenta, and using the Single Strike Energy to increase your power, as these ones add 20 damage, you can one-hit KO anything in the game with Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. Now, you're gonna need to get that energy back if you want to attack again, but for a time, this was an absolutely devastating attack. And in modern times, Single Strike Urshifu VMAX has fallen off a cliff because it takes a lot to get the 4 energy on, even with the Houndoom, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you're discarding all your energy and only getting 2 prizes instead of 3, as V-Stars are now the more popular way to play, it just doesn't become worth it anymore. But for a time, Single Strike Urshifu VMAX was a very strong deck, especially when it was paired with Umbreon VMAX, which we'll get to in a future episode. As I just mentioned, Houndoom is the backbone of the Single Strike deck archetype, using its Single Strike Roar ability to accelerate Single Strike energy to your Pokemon, giving them even more damage and allowing them to accelerate really quickly. Hard to imagine any Single Strike decks without Houndoom because of how important it is, but unfortunately the archetype as a whole has kind of fallen off a cliff. But I hope that the Single Strike archetype does come back in some shape or form someday, though it's probably not likely. Now we get to look at the awesome alt arts from Battle Styles, and Empoleon V is not just a pretty card, though look at it, it's gorgeous. This became a force in the Lost Origin meta as the Lost Box decks started taking over the game, and Empoleon actually shuts them off with the Emperor's Eyes ability. And its use has come down a bit because Lost Box decks have started using Path to the Peak, but this is a card that definitely had its moment in the sun. Unlike Tyranitar V, which also has a phenomenal alt art. Look at it all passed out. I still want to get this card someday. However, it's not really used from a competitive standpoint. 230 HP is pretty good for a Pokemon V, but its attack, Single Strike Crush, 240 damage, discard the top 4 cards of your deck, is really bad. So this card didn't really see much play at all. Corviknight VMAX was introduced in Battle Styles, and it has the ability that helps prevent it from taking effects of opponents' attacks, and also has the G-Max Hurricane move where 240 damage, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't use G-Max Hurricane. You could do some sneaky stuff with this because Corviknight's a really tanky Pokemon. You can combine it with Bronzong to move the energy, use Cheryl to heal Corviknight, and then put the energy back on and attack again. We'll cover those other cards in a sec. But Corviknight VMAX was not bad. For a time, Victini VMAX was a very popular archetype. It is a super simple deck to play. You go first, and then on the second turn, you attach your second energy, and if you're up against the Pokemon V, you do 220 damage. Solid enough that you are getting 2-hit KOs on VMAXs. One of the most straightforward decks I've ever seen. Unfortunately, this has fallen off a cliff as water types have become incredibly strong, and this is a VMAX and it's not quite doing enough damage. So Victini VMAX is, not really played anymore. Talk about a late bloomer, Stoutland V. And thanks to the Lugia deck with Archeops accelerating energy, it becomes a useful card. In particular, Double Dip Fangs does 40 damage, and if your opponent's basic Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this attack, you take one more prize card. You can load this up with powerful colorless energy to get its attack all the way up to 120 damage, which is enough to knock out a Comfey and even a Cramorant and take 2 prizes, which gives you quite the edge against single prize decks. Kricketune V, for a time, was a decent draw engine. When you got to less than 3 cards in your hand, you could use the ability Exciting Stage to draw a little more, and if it was in the active, you could draw up to 4. This has been since outclassed by stuff like Genesect V and most recently Bibarel, but for a time, this was what we had to draw cards. Tapu Koko VMAX fluctuates here and there. It's pretty bog standard in terms of its attack. 2 lightning, 1 colorless, 180 damage. You're getting 2-hit KOs on VMAXs. But if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the active Pokemon is now paralyzed. And this might see a bit of a resurgence here with Lugia terrorizing the game during the Silver Tempest era because 1, Tapu Koko hits Lugia for weakness, and 2, paralysis on Lugia is really good because most Lugia decks don't run any sort of switch cards, allowing you to take cheeky KOs here and there. Cherrim is a support Pokemon with the Spring Bloom ability. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a Grass Energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box. This is a little easier than Rillaboom in the sense that it's a Stage 1 Pokemon, but you have to have the cards in hand and you can't accelerate it to anything with a rule box, such as a Pokemon V or a Radiant Pokemon. It was okay. It saw some play here and there, but nothing too serious. Ugh, I hate this card so much. Durant, absolute terror with its move Devour. For each of your Durant in play, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. And this is the de facto mill deck in the Sword and Shield era. And this only got better with time as more types of double energy were added later on to make it even more consistent than it was in the past. And it has won a couple of online tournaments here and there. I think especially in the Fusion Strike era where Mew was constantly milling itself and then Durant just kind of accelerated it even faster. But like, oh, I have this deck built. I've never played it. I just don't like the mill play style, but there is a place for mill decks in the game for people to play and enjoy, and Durant is one of them. Salazzle is a Pokemon that rose to prominence a little bit thanks to its derisive roasting attack, where it does 90 damage for each special condition affecting your opponent's Pokemon. And you combine this with the Butterfree, where it can evolve all the way up in one go, and then you hit them for 270 damage. Later on, you could hit them for 300 damage. It's a little wonky in terms of setting it up over and over again, but I've definitely lost to this deck in the past. Boltund is a single prize archetype where its Defiant Spark move does 130 damage, and if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, this attack can be used for only 1 lightning energy. You would pair this up with something that adds damage to your own Pokemon, kind of like an old cemetery, and just consistently hit for 130. With a choice belt, you can hit for 160 and take 2-hit KOs on VMAXs. This is a deck that I've lost to this deck for sure. It's not really played much these days, but it's not a bad single prize deck option. Stonjourner is a single prize attacker from the single strike archetype, and it's got the move Giga Hammer, where you get 120 damage, plus during your next turn this Pokemon can't use Giga Hammer. It is kind of a single prize alternative to something like a single strike Urshifu. Later on, once Arceus came out, you would put single strike energy, like 1 single strike energy onto this, use the Giga Hammer, and 1-hit KO Arceus V-Star, but it hasn't really seen much play outside of that. Rapid Strike Phalanx has the move Rapid Strike Squad, where this does 20 damage for each of your Rapid Strike Pokemon in play, and you could pair this up with the Phalanx, where it adds defense based on the number of Phalanx that you have on the board. It's kind of annoying, and you can also use the Rapid Strike energy to power this up in one go. Never really saw much in the way of play, but kind of neat card. When I first started playing the game, Sandaconda was everywhere, thanks to its move Big Sand Cannon. For 1 fighting energy, you discard the top 6 cards of your deck. This attack does 60 damage for each fighting energy card you discarded in this way. It was a great way of punishing VMAX decks where you could 1-hit KO them potentially. You'd load your deck with a whole bunch of energy, and we would see other decks like this later, such as Celebration's Kyogre, and I hated this deck so much, but thankfully, I guess thankfully, it's not really played anymore. The Zubat line was interesting here, where it had the ability Discreet Draw, where you evolve from Zubat to Golbat, you could draw 2 cards, and then you pair that on the next turn, you draw with Crobat, you evolve to Crobat, and then you can draw 3 more cards. And this could really help you build up a fat hand. There are certain attackers, off the top of my head, like an Indeedee or Galarian Berserker V, that their damage is based on how many cards you have in hand, and this was the draw engine for that. Bronzong is a cool card because of its metal transfer ability, allowing you to move metal energy from one of your Pokemon to another Pokemon. And you could do some really nifty tricks with this, such as taking all of your energy away from one Pokemon, healing it with Cheryl, and then putting the energy back and attacking again. In the early days of Duraludon decks, this was a card that was used as well. You get Zacian to grab a bunch of energy from the deck with Intrepid Sword, move it to Bronzong, then move it to, or you don't have to move it to Bronzong. You can just go from Zacian to Duraludon with Bronzong to power it up. Cool card. Over to the trainer cards. There are a lot of noteworthy cards that are still used in competitive play today, such as Bruno, where you shuffle your hand into your deck and then you draw 4 cards. But if one of your Pokemon was just knocked out, you can shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 7. Great way of refreshing your hand. And this is a favorite among not even single strike decks, but single prize decks often run this because you're going to get knocked out a lot over the course of the game. Cheryl, a personal favorite of mine, where you can heal your evolution Pokemon, but you have to discard all of the energy along the way. But there are some tricks that allow you to keep that energy, or at least keep some of it. Skater's Park is one with the Shadow Rider deck, and you only lose 1 energy that way. Jolteon is one where you don't really care if you lose an energy because you can attack with only 1 energy. Cheryl, really handy card and one of the best healing cards in the Sword and Shield era. Energy Recycler is a card that allows you to get a whole bunch of basic energy from the discard back into your deck. I think Giratina is a big one that uses Energy Recycler, but there were a couple of archetypes where you really wanted to throw energy back in the deck, and this was a great card for that. Rapid Strike, Fan of Waves. This is a card that has vacillated in use here and there, but it lets you put a special energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon on the bottom of their deck. This can be really annoying to deal with if you are playing a special deck and someone hits you with the Fan of Waves, but it never really got that popular. I think the last time we really saw this card in use was with Whimsicott V-Star, but since then it's not really used. Even if now might not be a bad time with Lugia being what it is, but Lugia also has Archeops, so really you're not slowing them down too much by putting their energy back to the bottom of the deck. Karina's Focus allows you to draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. This was very handy when paired with Octillery because you could pretty much just grab this card whenever and reload your hand whenever you want. Off the top of my head, the biggest deck that used this was Rapid Strike Malamar, which would come out in Chilling Reign. One of the best cards in the Sword and Shield era. Level Ball allowed you to search your deck for a Pokemon that had up to 90 HP, and this allowed you to get a lot of great support Pokemon, and the big one in particular is Drizzile. Level Ball for Drizzile, then you combo that to grab whatever trainer card you want. Absolutely fantastic. Thankfully, this card is not going to go up in the next rotation. However, we are losing Quick Ball, and that really sucks. There was a time in the Sword and Shield era where VMAX decks could not hit Zamazenta V, and that can be a real problem, just having a wall that no one can hit with no counters to that. And Phoebe was that counter. You play Phoebe, and that allowed you to hit through Zamazenta's shield as a VMAX deck. This doesn't see as much play now. People are playing more with canceling Cologne, but this card has seen some success even this year with the Arceus Flying Pikachu deck, Phoebe allowing Flying Pikachu to take out Miltanks. As part of the Single Strike and Rapid Strike repertoire, we got some scrolls. We're showing the Scroll of Scorn here, which for 1 fighting energy lets you do 10 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. You would use this on something like a Single Strike Urshifu, where it can be really troublesome trying to get all that energy on for the Gmax 1 blow. But if Urshifu takes a hit, you can put the scroll on and then just hit for whatever damage you've already got on, which could still be enough to 1-hit KO a VMAX. Single Strike Mustard is a noteworthy card because this is a favorite of the Arceus Duraludon deck. You whittle your hand down to just Single Strike Mustard, and when you play this card, you can play any Single Strike Pokemon from your deck, put it on, even evolution Pokemon, which allowed you to get a Duraludon on the board without having to evolve up. This also allowed you to get Single Strike Beedrill, which was amazing for instantly knocking out any Pokemon with special energy on it. There's also a Rapid Strike Mustard, which did the same thing for Rapid Strike Pokemon, but it never really caught on. Tool Jammer was a card that just blocked the use of tools from your opponent. This was great for blocking things like Cape of Toughness, later on Choice Belt, air balloons, and a really handy tech to have in many decks. Now, most decks don't run Tool Jammer, but it's usually an asset to have one if you can find room for it. Tower of Darkness is a stadium specifically for single strike. I mean, you don't have to be a single strike deck to use Tower of Darkness, but if you were to discard another single strike card, you could draw 2 cards if Tower of Darkness was in play. There was a brief moment in time where Urshifu VMAX played this to draw some more cards. Single strike decks use this as a draw engine, and even Rotom V uses this to discard tools to put them in the discard to power up its attack. Tower of Waters is a little different. This one is a Rapid Strike card, and it allows Rapid Strike Pokemon to move freely. Well, not really move freely. It's their retreat cost is down by 2, which pretty much means Rapid Strike Pokemon move for free. And this was really handy with Rapid Strike Urshifu in particular, that could come in and land that big Gale Thrust for 150 damage with only 1 energy. Last but not least, an important card in the single strike arsenal, Urn of Vitality. This lets you shuffle 2 single strike energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. Amazing, pretty much a vital card in the single strike deck because you're oftentimes discarding or losing that single strike energy in battle, and Urn of Vitality lets you get it back and re-accelerate with Houndoom later. And that is Battle Styles, one of the strongest sets from a competitive standpoint. This is a set that I'm pretty familiar with because I started playing the game just at the tail end of Battle Styles. Like literally the week before Chilling Reign is when I started playing the Pokemon trading card game. And Battle Styles is one that I know from a collector standpoint, people don't really care about it. And even in a gameplay perspective, I think that a number of players take this set for granted. But in retrospect, there are so many good and influential cards in the set that it's probably always going to be a personal favorite of mine. But what do you think? Do you enjoy the Battle Style set, whether it's from a collector standpoint or a gameplay standpoint? Let me know in the comments. And that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. We will continue our retrospective on the Sword and Shield era soon, but for the time being, you can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can also find me on Twitch at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Would love to see you there and interact with you live. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. Up next in the retrospective is going to be Chilling Reign. But for now, let's get out of here. Later. There we go. All right. Bye, everybody.